interest. Say to people who are being threatened with chucked out of their homes, we're not going to chuck you out, you can keep your home, you can live there, rather than doing what Northern Rock is doing at the moment. Look at all the money they're spending, bailing out the banking system. They could afford to use a nationalised bank to do that. And it's not just the banks. Look at Southampton at the moment. The Ford's plant is threatened with closure. It's a Ford's transit van plant. It's one of the last bits of the car industry in Britain. Why should that just close? Why instead shouldn't the government step in and nationalise it? And maybe it wouldn't continue to produce transit vans. Maybe we've got enough transit vans. I'm sure the workers themselves could work out what they could produce that would be more useful, as was done in the past. And the idea when Rover was closed a few years ago, that maybe they could have produced environmentally friendly buses for a public transport system around the country and so on. Why not do that instead of allowing that factory to close? Things have changed, because when Rover was shut in Birmingham, we raised those ideas, and the workers in that factory said, you're absolutely right, but it's never going to happen because nobody ever nationalises anything. But the workers in Southampton are not going to say that now. The idea of nationalisation has once again been put on the agenda. Now, having said that, while we would welcome one nationalised plant, one nationalised bank, we would not stop at that. For us, one nationalised bank or factory working within a capitalist economy is a limited reform. We would want more than that. Years ago, when I first became a socialist, 25 years ago, we would say we want to nationalise the commanding heights of the economy. Until last week, nobody under 40 knew what you were talking about. But now they're talking about it in the US Congress, so I'll say it once again. We want to nationalise the commanding heights of the economy. What we mean by that is the 150 or so big multinational companies that dominate the British economy, and we think they should be bought into democratic public ownership and run for the good of the population rather than for the profits of a few. Now, people here will raise, that's a good idea, but how on earth are you going to get it? And it's true, if you look at the main parties, the establishment parties in Britain at the moment, New Labour, the Liberals, the Tories, they are all parties of capitalism. Blair got rid of the last elements of kind of workers' representation in the Labour Party. It's an out-and-out party of capitalism these days. So none of them are going to argue for even the most minimal measures that I've raised there. They're not even prepared to argue for a windfall tax. Never mind any of that. So one critical part, a kind of immediate step that we need to do to begin to rebuild support for socialist ideas over the course of the next few years is the establishment of a mass party that argues in workers' interests. After all, there are 7 million people organised in trade unions in this country, and at the moment, the majority of those trade unions are affiliated to the Labour Party. And it means at the Trade Union Congress this year, trade union leaders got up and made really good speeches about how if they don't do something about fuel poverty, then they're going to be insulating pensioners' coffins this winter if it's a cold winter, which is a very effective point about what we're facing. New Labour carry on and say, well, we'll give you a little bit of insulation if you pay half the money, and do absolutely nothing to reduce the cost of fuel. And then the same trade union leaders go to the Labour Party conference and say, Gordon Brown's the best we can have, he's our man, he's fighting for us, when it patently and blatantly isn't the case. If you look at what New Labour's done on the issue of housing, the total amount they've promised to put in is £1 billion. The housing market is going down by £1 billion a day. I mean, it's nothing, it's tiny. They've not been prepared to do anything to help ordinary working class people. And one of the things we would raise is those trade unions should stop funding New Labour and begin to build a party that actually stood in their interests, that fought for a nationalised bank that actually acted in ordinary working class people's interests, that got rid of the anti-trade union laws, that introduced a living minimum wage and so on. Now, you'd argue within that about exactly what programme that party would stand on. As I said, we would argue that that party should fight to take over the 150 monopolies that dominate the economy. There will be others who might want less. Many, many years ago, when there was a left in the Labour Party, a mass left in the Labour Party, there used to be some people who said, well, we just nationalise one thing in every sector, so we'll have 25 that will nationalise. And there were others like us that said, no, you've got to do more than that. You could have those debates within a new party, but what would be important is a party that saw itself as standing for working class people. At the same time, as we fight for a party like that, then we also have to recognise that the only way to stop the bosses making us pay for this recession is to get organised and to fight back. And I think that that is clearly the case. We can win victories. However, you'd have to say, where a lot of the trade union leaders are too linked to New Labour, they're doing a very bad job of leading their members at the moment. If you look at the question of public sector pay, this government is expecting public sector workers to take a pay cut. The Civil Servants Union, where we play a leading role, is fighting on that issue. Unison, the biggest public sector union, has gone into compulsory arbitration, which is a complete betrayal of its members that voted to take strike action and to fight on this issue. And we have to argue against what is taking place in Unison, but it means that it may be, in this struggle, that it's the civil servants and perhaps the teachers, or hopefully the teachers, that are left to fight alone. We will have to argue for united action of the whole public sector, and that can win things. Before the last general election, the government wanted to destroy the pension rights of public sector workers. The public sector unions threatened united strike action, and that was enough to at least get rid of all of the proposals for existing staff. If the union leaders had been prepared to fight for all staff, including new entrants, you could have won even more, but it was a victory nonetheless for existing workers. So if we get organised, if we fight back, we can have an effect. I'll give one other example because I think it's relevant to what's going to happen this winter. And some years ago, when I was a young socialist, then we organised a campaign against what was called the poll tax. It was a tax where every single person had to pay the same in the country, whether they were a hedge fund trader or an unemployed person on a council estate. 18 million people refused to pay that tax. As a result of a movement that we initiated, we got rid of the tax and we got rid of Maggie Thatcher, who was the woman who was trying to introduce it. It shows you can organise a movement and you can win victories. And it does raise issues about people who cannot afford to pay their fuel bills this winter. It's not as simple. Many of the poorest are actually on key meters. I'm on a key meter, which means you've got no choice but to put money in the meter. But for example, when pensioners are threatened with being cut off, if we organise protests in their front garden saying don't cut this person off and appeal to the unions, the people who come and do the cutting off are trade union members, and we have to organise a campaign to say that that shouldn't take place. So we have to fight back to do our best to protect working class people. However, that on its own is never enough, because they always come back for more. Capitalist profits, as Marx explained, are based on exploiting us. And that means you can make them give you something, but the minute your back's turned, the minute you relax, they try and take it back again. Even the example of the poll tax. It's true everything I just said. But it's also true that we got rid of Thatcher and we got John Major, which, while weak, was not exactly what we wanted in a Prime Minister. And as far as tax went, we got the council tax, which is still an extremely regressive kind of tax that exists in Britain today. And so that does raise, as I've already indicated, the need for more fundamental change, for socialist change, to change, if you like, the commanding heights of the economy. How can that be achieved? It will not just be achieved by building a mass party of the working class. It will take mass movements of working class people. But those will come in the years that we're going into. This year is a year of many anniversaries, not just the Communist Manifesto. It's also the anniversary of 1968. 1968 is a bit before my time, but was a year that did change history. And one of the things that happened then is in France, 10 million people occupied the factories because they wanted socialism. At that point, if it hadn't been for the betrayals of the Communist Party, which is a different issue, you could have had the development of a worker state and working towards socialism in France, an advanced capitalist country. What that shows is working class people, as Marx explained, have enormous power. And if we have mass support for socialist ideas, then if people are prepared to mobilise behind those ideas, the capitalists will not be able to stop us. And in the 21st century, we will be able to begin to build a socialist society. I think one of the things that strikes you most about all this stuff with the hedge fund traders and all the rest of them, apart from the fact that none of them have understood the workings of their own financial system at all, they're now admitting they never really got the question of futures and so on. But the other thing is how all the talent of society has gone into that. It's not an exaggeration to say that if you're a physics or a maths graduate in the last 10 years, you didn't go and teach it in a school. You didn't go and work out the nature of the universe and try and work out about string theory and all those things that I don't understand. The vast majority of you went into the city to work the computers of the finance industry because that was the only way they could guess all the different things that they were gambling on. What kind of condemnation of capitalism is that? We want a society where all that talent of young people, all those ideas is not used for the gambling of big business, but is instead used to begin to meet the needs of humanity and to provide all of us with a decent life in the years to come.